Back when I was in my early 20s, I worked for a courier delivery service in Burien. I'd rather not get into the details of the company or anything, but let's just say it wasn't that glamorous. At that time, I was going through one of the roughest patches of my life. My girlfriend had just left me. Also, my dad had passed away from a heart attack, which is why, being the only son, I had to step up. My mom and my little brother depended on me to keep it going. I didn't have a lot of options, so I took the job to keep food on the table. It wasn't a great job, but I was used to it. Long hours, bad pay, and constant deadlines. Nothing unusual. But that day, July 2nd, is burned into my memory forever. That day was brutal. I had almost 80 packages to deliver, and by the time I got to the last few, I was completely drained. I'd been driving non-stop, running up and down porches. I almost got bit by a dog. At the end, I was sweating through my uniform in the summer heat. But when I finally checked my truck at the end of my route, I saw I only had 5 packages left. 2 of the packages didn't have proper addresses written on them, just some half-legible handwriting that made no sense. The other 2 were scheduled for pickup the next day. My boss had told me before that if I couldn't deliver something, I should bring it back to the office. But the thing is, I lived near the depot, so I called him to check if it was okay to keep the packages overnight and bring them in the next morning. He said it was fine since we trusted each other, and I'd been working there long enough to prove I wasn't going to steal it or anything. My boss told me to come to the place early in the morning because the next day was July 3rd, which was expected to be chaotic, with everyone shipping last-minute gifts and packages for Independence Day. So I packed up the leftover boxes in my truck and headed home. I lived in a small rented room back then, nothing fancy, just a bed, a little desk, and a beat-up couch. The kind of place you settle for when you're broke and desperate to save every penny. My neighborhood wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. There were only some people who lived there at night, because most of my neighbors do night shifts in local companies. So after parking my truck and heading inside, I made myself a quick dinner, instant noodles as usual, and sat on the couch to relax. I started counting the expenses and how to get out of this situation and all the things. But then I heard something. It was a thud, like something heavy had fallen outside. At first, I thought it might have been a raccoon or a stray cat knocking over a trash can, because that wasn't uncommon around here. But the longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had the feeling that maybe I should check it. So I grabbed my flashlight and went outside to check. The truck was parked just a few feet from my door, and as I looked at the truck, my heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing by the truck, pulling packages out of the back. My first instinct was to yell at him, thinking he was some random thief trying to steal whatever he could find. But then I saw the others. 2 men standing just a few feet away from him, holding guns. They weren't just keeping watch. They were scanning the area, making sure no one was around to see what they were doing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random theft. This was something way bigger than that. I panicked and tried to quietly shut the door. But in my nervousness, I dropped the flashlight. It clattered loudly on the porch. "Damn it," I said quietly in panic. Then all 3 of them whipped their heads in my direction. For a moment, they just stared at me. But then they started moving. My heart was pounding. I ran back inside and locked the door, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the deadbolt. Then I grabbed my phone and called 911. When the call connected, I started whispering to the operator, "3 men. They've got guns, and they're trying to get into my house." The operator told me to stay calm and stay on the line, but calm was the last thing I felt. The men had started banging on my door, yelling for me to open up. One of them even tried the handle, rattling it hard enough that I thought it might break. I shut off all the lights and crouched behind the bed, clutching the phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. The banging got louder and louder, and I kept thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. But then I heard something else. Sirens. The banging stopped. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then I heard one of them say, "We've got it. Let's go." By the time the police arrived, the men were gone. They'd taken all the packages. The cops took my statement and checked the area, but they didn't find much. They told me they'd look into it, but weeks went by and nothing ever came of it. I still don't know who those men were, but I was certain they were after one of the packages. I don't live in that house anymore, but every time I hear a noise outside, my stomach drops. I can't help but think back to that night, wondering what would have happened if the cops hadn't shown up when they did. Back in 2017, I was just a middle schooler living with my mom and little brother. My dad wasn't around that much because of his work. He was always traveling, so it was usually just the 3 of us at home. Our weekends were pretty simple, watching TV, playing video games, or just hanging around the house. That weekend, though, me and my little brother Oliver had this big idea. We were obsessed with the Terminator movies. We'd already seen the older ones on TV, but there was a new one out in theaters, and we had to see it. Problem was, being kids, we weren't allowed to watch an R-rated movie without an adult. Naturally, we begged our mom to come with us. She just laughed and said, "I've got too much to do. Your dad's coming home tonight? maybe he'll go with you boys. We knew Dad would be tired after coming home. Definitely he's not going. So we tried everything to convince our mom, but she wouldn't budge. Then we decided we'd go on our own. We took the bus to the theater, feeling super excited. When we got there, we were ready to rush in and thinking about how to buy the tickets. Oliver suddenly said, "Let's eat first. I'm starving." I was annoyed. He always had the worst timing, but my stomach was also growling too. So we went to the McDonald's nearby. We ordered chicken nuggets and fries, sat down at a corner table, and started eating. But the real problem was still on our minds. How were we going to buy tickets for an R-rated movie? We were whispering about it, trying to come up with a plan, when the man at the next table overheard us. He looked like he was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, dressed in a jacket and jeans, nothing out of the ordinary. He leaned over and said, "You kids trying to see a movie?" At first, we just looked at him, unsure what to say. He smiled and said, "I could buy the tickets for you if you want." Oliver immediately said that would be great, but I was a bit hesitant. Why would a random stranger do that? It didn't sit right with me. I thanked him but said, "It's okay, we'll figure it out." We were about to leave when the man said, "Look kids, my wife and kid are already at the theater. I'm heading there now. It's no big deal. I'll grab the tickets for you while I'm at it. Last chance." He wasn't pushy, and he seemed normal enough. My brother nudged me, clearly wanting to say yes, so I caved. "All right, sir, thanks," I said. We followed him to the theater. True to his word, he bought 2 tickets for us. My brother was thrilled, and honestly, I was just relieved we could finally see the movie. When we got inside, we found our seats, and I figured that was the end of it. But then the man sat down next to us. "My family's sitting on the other side," he explained, "but I couldn't find a seat with them. Hope you don't mind." Now, something about that felt off. To make conversation, I asked, "How many people in your family came here?" He smiled and said, "My wife, my daughter, and my eldest son." "Cool," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, alarm bells were ringing. Something wasn't right. When we met, he said he was with his wife and kid. Now he's saying that both his children came with him. And if it was true, why didn't his wife just wait for him? I wanted to get up and call the security, but I couldn't just walk out and leave Oliver behind. So I decided to sit there and stay alert. After the movie ended, the man leaned over and said, "Come on, let me introduce you to my family." My heart sank. I grabbed my brother's arm and said, "Thanks for the tickets, but we've got to get home. Our mom's waiting." Without waiting for a response, I pulled my brother out of there and headed straight for the bus stop. My brother kept asking why we were in such a rush. He was curious, but I couldn't just stress him out. So I just told him, "We're late. Mom's gonna freak out." It was already getting dark by the time we got off the bus and started walking home, but we were only a couple of blocks away. I was just relieved that I got rid of the man, and then I noticed someone behind us. At first, I thought maybe it was some random pedestrian, but then I saw the scarf. A dark scarf wrapped around his face. He looked the same height as the man from the theater. I froze. My brother started to ask something, but I cut him off. "Run. Go home. Get Mom and Dad." He hesitated for a second, but I shoved him and yelled, "Go!" The man lunged at me as my brother took off running. I fought back as hard as I could, hitting and kicking, but he was stronger. He grabbed me and I wrapped myself around him, trying to make it harder for him to move. He struggled for a moment, then pulled something out of his coat, a spray can. Before I could react, he sprayed me in the face. It burned. My eyes, my nose, my throat, it all felt like it was on fire. My head started spinning, and I couldn't hear anything except this loud ringing in my ears. My grip loosened, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My dad was sitting next to me, his face full of worry. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat still burning. He explained that my brother had made it home and told Mom what happened. My dad was in the couch watching TV, so when he heard, he ran towards me as soon as he could. He saw the man carrying me, so he started shouting at the man. It was hard for him to carry me and run, so he threw me aside and left the place. Then the cops came and I was taken to the hospital. "They're going to catch him," my dad said. "The cops are on it." He also told me how proud he was of me for protecting my little brother. But honestly, I didn't feel brave. I just felt lucky to be alive. The police never caught the man. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or what could have happened if things had gone differently. It still haunts me, though. How close I came to something so terrible, and how one random decision, like trusting a stranger, can change everything. I recently moved to New Orleans after getting a job as a construction crew manager. Leaving Kansas was really a big move for me, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. Back then, I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I had to find a place that had fit my tight budget. After a bit of searching, I came across an apartment that seemed just perfect for my needs. It wasn't that fancy at all, but it was decent, and only $400 a month, which was half of what I was paying back in Kansas. Plus, it wasn't that far from my office either, so I didn't have to wake up early to get to work on time. The landlord showed me around the place, and everything looked fine. It wasn't huge, just a small one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen, but it was clean and quiet. I was glad that I found something so fast and within my budget. The very next day, I packed up my stuff, moved in, and started settling into my life in New Orleans. The first few days were great. I was getting used to the new city, meeting my neighbors, and just enjoying the fresh start. Among the people I met at work was a guy named Dale. He lived in the apartment near the gas station, which was just half a mile from my place. We hit it off right away because we had a lot in common professionally, and he seemed like a cool guy to hang out with. One evening, Dale came over to my place. We had a few beers, talked about work, and swapped stories about the projects we'd been involved in. It was nice having someone to talk to after the stress of moving and starting a new job. We even threw on Netflix for a bit before we realized it was getting late. Dale had to head to work early the next morning, and I did too, so he said, "Next time, buddy," and left. After he left, it was just me and my thoughts. The beer was starting to affect me a bit. I had a little urge to pee when Dale was around, but now it's like I am going to explode if I don't go. So I went to pee, but that night I didn't brush my teeth though, because if I had brushed, the current sleepiness had gotten out of my body. You can call me lazy, but I just wanted to sleep that night. So I jumped on my bed and started winding down. I was just about to fall asleep after some time, but then something kept bothering me. I started hearing a loud shouting coming from the apartment next to me. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was just someone arguing or being loud for a moment, but the shouting didn't stop. It sounded like a man's voice, and he was yelling something I couldn't understand. It didn't sound like English or any language I'd heard before. I turned my light on, got out of bed, and went to check it out. The shouting was definitely coming from the apartment next to mine. Their lights were still on, and it sounded like the guy was standing right near the wall. I was really annoyed. I aggressively started knocking on the door, but the shouting continued. So I knocked harder and yelled, "Hey, some people have work to do in the morning. Can you cut it out with the noise?" The shouting stopped immediately. A moment later, the door opened, and an old woman stepped out. She looked to be in her 60s or 70s, with wild gray hair and a creepy smile plastered across her face. "Hello," she said, her voice calm and cheerful. "I'm Rayona. Nice to meet you." I was taken aback. I wasn't expecting an elderly woman to answer the door. I tried to stay polite, even though I was annoyed. Nice to meet you too, ma'am. But can you please keep it down? It's late and I have work in the morning." She just smiled wider and said, "You won't have to interrupt me again." Her tone sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe that's how she speaks. As I was about to go for my place, I did a little peek into her apartment. It was dimly lit, almost dark, but I was sure I saw some strange writings on the walls, some kind of large, strange symbols I didn't recognize. And there was this smell, like something was burning. I didn't ask questions. Maybe it was a religious thing or something. I just went back to my apartment, locked the door, and tried to sleep. The next day was a long one at work. I got back home way later than usual, and I was so tired that I just threw my stuff down, took off my clothes, and went straight to bed. I didn't even bother checking my phone or scrolling through Instagram like I usually did. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something again. This time it wasn't shouting. It was a strange rustling noise, and it was coming from my balcony, like someone was outside of my balcony. I froze. My apartment was on the 5th floor. There was no way anyone could be out there, at least not without a ladder or some serious climbing skills. I opened my eyes and looked toward the balcony door. My heart stopped when I saw the silhouette of someone standing there. "Who's there?" I shouted, but no response. Then I tried to look braver and started approaching the balcony. I grabbed my phone and was about to dial 911 when I heard a loud thud. I ran to the balcony and flung the door open, but no one was there. I looked down at the street below, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone. It didn't make sense. If someone had jumped, I would have heard it or seen them running off if he had survived, but there was nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went to work completely exhausted. When I told Dale about what happened, he suggested I move out. At first, I hesitated. I just moved in, and the place was cheap, but Dale pointed out a place at his place, and I decided it wasn't worth staying on that place. After that night, whenever I tell this story to someone, they always shrug it off, saying I was imagining things. But without any information, the only one that knows the truth is just me.